Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour, book by book, day by day, through my Penguin Classic wall. I was originally in 2019. I was doing a library tour, of the normal way to do it, where you set up the camera and you say, "I'm on this shelf, so we'll do this shelf, book by book by book. Here it is." And that took me a long time to do because, unlike a lot of library tours on BookTube, I have read all the books in my library, except for one bookcase. I have read them all, so every one of them had a long, tedious Grandpa Simpson story attached to it. So it took a long time to do. It took a long part of 2019 to do that library tour. And the one part I left out was these Penguin Classics. And I originally thought I would do them in that manner, in the manner of a normal library tour, but I can't. I just can't do it. These have meant too much to me. These books are the ones I visit more often than any other. They're the ones those and the bookcase right past the shark, in between the shark and the bat. There's a bookcase of collected book reviews, book essays, prefaces to books, that sort of thing. My own profession, people who have made books out of their writings, where they're doing a quick 800 words for money, for $50 to get an electricity bill paid. They then have delusions of grandeur and they make them in a book. And I go back to that bookcase quite a bit, but I do that in a targeted way, usually. If I'm writing about the Kennedys or about James Madison or whatever, I want to know if anybody else has written about them. If I'm writing about Lady Chatterley's Lover, God save me from ever having to do that. But if I do, then I go back to those and do that. But the bookcase where I spend the most time just idly socializing with old friends, it's this Penguin wall. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't pull all those books off 10 at a time. So instead, I've been going through one book at a time, and fortunately, the idea of doing one book a day was sort of well received. So we're going to continue to do that. And we are in the Renaissance. We're in the long Italian Renaissance, with a few exceptions, going back and forth, back and forth. So, and today we're in Tudor England. For another volume of poetry. And this volume, much like the last one on Thomas Wyatt, is something where the main thing I'm going to recommend is that Penguin Classics got their hands on a great edition. The greatest edition. Obviously, we're not talking about translation here. Instead, we're talking about the introduction and especially the notes. Penguin got a great edition of this poet. Now, I'm going to disagree with Erasmus about this poet. Erasmus had a very high opinion of this poet, and I do not. It's John Skelton. There's the complete English poems, and there, if you look closely, you will see the king. There is Henry VIII, right in the middle of a throng of courtiers. John Skelton was a tutor to the young Henry VIII, and he was a fixture at court, and he wrote weird poetry, he sort of commanded the reigning metrics of his day and warped them to his own use, so that they are often called Skeltronics. They're often called just a totally idiosyncratic thing. He wasn't the only one to do that. That kind of rampant literary inventiveness was starting to burst out all over in the Tudor era, especially at the advent of Henry VIII as king. A thing that a lot of people who know only popular history might not think. They might not associate it with Henry, but it was the dawn of an incredible age. Henry was young when he came to the throne. He was big, he was young, he was athletic, he was gorgeous, he was eloquent, he was learned, he was humane and broad-minded. He had a beloved queen, he had an enormous treasury, he had a kingdom at peace. He started his reign with a couple of very dramatic purges of some of the corrupt old creatures of his father's reign. In other words, the sun was coming out from behind clouds and bursting all over. And if you have not grown up in a monarchy, if you have not grown up in a system where the rule comes down from one person and it's total happenstance whether that person is worthy or not. Everything depends on it. Your whole life depends on it. If that person is not worthy, your taxes will go up enormously, 300%. If that person is not worthy, you and your sons will be drafted to some foreign war that means nothing at all to you, and die like fodder there, or come back maimed. If that person is not worthy, you may be attacked. Your kingdom may be attacked. You, if the very worst circumstance happens, and that person is unworthy or unlucky, you may be conquered. It's It was all up to that. There was no such thing as otherwise. Much though Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, wanted to start to create a bureaucracy that would be a buffer against the fate of whoever was at the top. It wasn't true in his day, and it wasn't true in Henry VIII's day. All power flowed downward. And you were either lucky enough to live in the era of an enlightened prince, or you weren't. That's all there was to it. And the thing that often gets forgotten, because Henry VIII grew corpulent and he grew murderous as he grew older, is that his reign started with pure sunlight, just pure hope and happiness of people thinking, what a great prince we have, what a great kingdom we have, what a great time to be English we have. It wasn't always true, and it wasn't true on the borders, but nevertheless, it gave rise to a whole bunch of literary creativity. It started to just blossom. In Henry's reign, there was a bit of it in his father's reign, and of course, famously in his daughter's reign. And John Skelton was part of that. He's a very inventive poet, a very clever pants poet, a very clever Hans poet. All sorts of innovations. I'm a big fan of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I'm not all that keen on innovation in my poetry, but not until you've shown me talent. And with all due respect to Erasmus and to a bunch of other people, I don't see much talent in John Skelton. I never have. I tried real hard. I reread a chunk of this book for today's video, and I have never seen it. I know that it's probably there and just eluding me. Certainly there's a lot of metrical inventiveness in a nerdy kind of, oh, did you see what a clever thing I just did kind of way. But comparing him, for instance, to Wyatt, I don't see the comparison whatsoever. Wyatt throbs with life, and John Skelton, I don't think, does. He's as dry and intellectual as an anagram, as a whole book of anagrams. But nevertheless, the edition here that Penguin got is John Scattergood, who did this edition. No idea. I didn't do my due diligence, so I don't know if John Scattergood is still alive. But if he is, hats off to him, because this is an unbelievably exhaustive edition of John Skelton, of his poetry. Just unbelievably exhaustive. There isn't anything you could want to know about Skelton's life, and especially about the tricks and cleverness that he pulls in his verse, that is not carefully and exhaustively explained in this volume. In other words, I've often we mentioned on this March of the Penguins, what Hannah's books refers to as my March of the Penguins. Although one of you pointed out the technical term is a waddle of penguins. But one of the things that I pointed out is that Penguin can't always get the great edition of, for instance, a poet's work. They can't always get the very best one. They can't always get the translation I would want them to get, or whatever. That's going to be true. We're going to see that later on. For instance, their version of Milton is not the one that I would wish they had, but every once in a while they do. They did with Thomas Wyatt, and they do with John Skelton. You cannot do better for a volume that undergirds you, that holds you up, and teaches you everything you need to know about Skelton's references, his allusions, his innovations, everything. You don't need to go begging. You don't need to go anywhere else. This volume will do that. And a lot of people want that in a volume. A lot of people do. Some people want it even when I think they shouldn't. Like, for instance, let's pick a slightly less willfully obscure poet. Well, let's say Walt Whitman. I would always argue, I have argued many, many times with young people, that probably the best way to encounter Leaves of Grass first is with no editorial hand-holding. Just let it wash over you. Read it, appreciate it for what it is first. I'm not sure that you could do that with any of the poems of John Skelton. You could certainly do it with Chaucer, with Canterbury Tales. Absolutely you could. You will benefit in the case of Chaucer and in the case of Whitman and Emily Dickinson and other people. You will benefit from annotations, but you can do it without them. And I've often said that it's probably a good idea for you to do it without them first. But Skelton, I don't believe you could get 10 feet into this guy's work without heavy annotation. Maybe I'm just being too harsh on. Probably there's a Skelton fan out there who's outraged. I hope it's not, what was his name? John Scattergood. Oh my God. But anyway, that's your Penguin Classic for today. It's not an author that I can personally recommend. He's not sending me into ecstasies of, oh my God, I'm in love, he's an old friend, nothing like that. But I can certainly recommend this edition. This is a Penguin Classic edition that cannot be superseded. So if that's your jam, as we say on BookTube, if you want not only a nice paperback of somebody but an edition that leaves nothing out, then this is the one to have. So in that sense, it's a recommendation. So that's your Penguin Classic for today. We're just gonna waddle on. So we'll see what we encounter tomorrow, and I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.